o'clock. It's April
Perfect, no scar.
24th, 2024. This is a work session between the assembly and the administration and the school boards. Some of the school representatives are here, and our finance director will pretty much run the show. She's got a little slideshow for us here. So Jody, it's your turn.
Thanks. Okay, so we're just gonna do a really high overview of the, hold on, this isn't, oh, hold on. Glitch already. There we go. Of the budget, we're gonna go through the general fund. As you've probably noticed, we budgeted in a deficit, and we're gonna talk about that. We're gonna talk about school funding, the fund balance for the Secure Rural Schools Fund and the general fund, balancing the general fund budget, borough debt, enterprise funds, and motor pool. And stop me if I start going too fast. I do have a few slides, so I want to get through them, but you're welcome to answer, ask questions at any time. That's totally fine. All right, so the budget submitted to you had a $426,000 deficit. The reason why would be a few different reasons, actually. The school funding request for an additional $400,000 for operations, union negotiations, increased salaries quite a bit. We're going to see another 2.5% increase for the PMEA employees, and IBW the same?
I think so.
I think so, yeah. Health insurance, I'll talk about this more later, but we are going to see an 8% increase, and that cost for the borough is $120,000. So, and then inflation, things are just going up in price. So the general fund balance policy says that we should keep between 4 and 6 months of operating expenses. I'm estimating that we'll have around 6.7 months of operating expenses at the end of this fiscal year. This is approximately $6 million in reserves. If the assembly chooses not to make any changes to the budget, we will need to use $400,000. We would probably still be slightly over the 6 months of operating expenses if we did this, but I'm not recommending that we do this. I just wanted to let you know that we do have a healthy fund balance, and I'll show you in a later slide that can go away quickly. So these departments are where your tax dollars are going. And I gave you all printouts so you could actually see that a little more. It just gives you an idea over 5 years for each department, what we're looking at. Everything stays relatively flat. I do want to point out with the police and jail, police, jail, and fire in fiscal year 21, which is the first line in those groups. We are able to allocate a lot of their payroll to a CARES Act grant because of COVID. And so that did not, some of their payroll did not, a lot of their payroll did not get coded to the general fund. So that's why that year is so low. And that saved us money. That really helped keep our fund balance up during COVID, actually. Public Works is another large department. That's our streets department and building maintenance. And then also you can see the school's requests for contributions for their proposed contribution of $3.4 million. And then you'll see at the very end, the Mountain View Manor Assisted Living Subsidy. This year, I included that supplemental budget item that you just did of transferring $300 and around $50,000 of reserves, which is half of the surplus from last year to the assisted living facility. So these are the general fund's largest sources of revenues. This isn't all of the revenue sources, but there's so many little ones that I left them out. This demonstrates how much we rely on our property taxes and sales tax. Yeah. Is there any questions right now? Okay, so property tax, the blue line, you can see that in fiscal year 2024, property tax revenue saw an increase of about $316,000. It went up a little bit to help fund the additional $1 million request from the school last year. In this proposed fiscal year 25 budget, we did not put in an increase to property taxes. That's certainly an option for the assembly to do. I know that a lot of people have been, concerned because their assessments have gone up so much, what that's going to look like for them. So we left the property tax revenue line item flat, but we do have about $1 million that we could increase it for. So that would be about $350,000 in service area 1. Sales tax, the orange line in fiscal year 21. This is when we signed up to be part of the Alaska Remote Seller Sales Tax Commission. You can see where it jumps up there. We had budgeted 4.1 million for this fiscal year. However, the growth in online remote sales tax is continuing to increase since it began a few years ago. So we're estimating that sales tax revenue will finish off our current fiscal year at about 4.4 million. And we're thinking next year it'll be about 4.5 million. So you can see the big jump in remote. I always get asked this question, well, how much are we bringing in for remote sales tax, internet sales tax? And since we started in 2020, we started like 3 months in or 4 months in, wasn't much. And as the commission has brought in more and more vendors, they're adding vendors all the time, it has jumped up a lot. I don't see it jumping up this much in the future. I think it'll start to flatten out a little bit, just because, once you get all the retailers on board, then you're not going to bring in as much revenue. Any questions on this?
So that number 459
Yeah.
and change, is that statewide?
No, that's the amount of money that Petersburg got after expenses. So
460,000
yeah,
ish.
yeah. This year, every month we get about $40,000. Yeah, annually. So
This is from like Amazon or
Yeah.
basically all the places that people order online.
So they electronically file with the state with, it's a branch of Alaska Municipal League, actually, the commission. And they electronically file. AML charges us a fee. I think it's about 12%, but then as the revenue grows and hits like 8 million or something, then it drops down to 8%, our fees. But yeah, it's been really helpful, and it's how it got us through helping fund the $1 million increase for the school in the last year. So I want to point out the community services. We actually cut KFSK radio and Mountain View Food Services 10% from their requested amount in the general fund. We did not include the new grant requests in this proposed budget. That was the WAVE and the HIP, $17,000 and $30,000. The assembly could add them, but I would request that if you add them, you tell us where that money is going to come from. We did move the museum down to the transit room tax. They had historically been usually funded from the general fund, but there is enough money in the transit room tax fund to cover the museum. And since it's a visitor related item, we did that. Usually that doesn't happen every year, but this year it just happens to. And then at this next assembly meeting, I'm going to give to the assembly new ordinance to increase the transit room tax from 4% to 7%. So this is bed tax. This is, when you go and stay at a hotel here in town or a lodge or an Airbnb. This is the 4% that they pay. We're actually very low for anywhere in Alaska. The average transit room tax rate in Alaska is 7%, actually a little above 7%. I think it's a 9%.
Do our lodges pay bed tax?
They do.
Okay.
So yeah, then we're hoping we just keep the museum expense in the transit room tax fund all the time and get it out of the general fund. Okay, the school funding. On page 31 of the budget, you'll find the local contribution to the school at $3.4 million. This is our maximum allowed contribution. On page 33 in the Parks and Rec budget, you'll notice that their utility expense bumped up to $90,000. This is half of the school's electric expense at the aquatic center for the boilers. This will be in addition to the $103,000 a year Parks and Rec is paying for utilities at the aquatic center. And then on page 84 of the budget, there is a capital project fund for the school. Per the school's request, we are budgeting to transfer $250,000 of this for their pupil transportation fund. And just to note that all the requests that we received from the school were put into this budget, unless I forgot something, is that right? Yeah, okay. And Shannon, can you explain why the $250,000 is important to transfer to the school this year?
Yeah, so we're requesting a transfer into our people transportation fund that's separate from our general fund, and it's our busing services to get students to and from school. I think it was early 2000s, like it stopped fully funding it on a reimbursement base, and they started going to a per pupil allocation like they do with the BSA. So it's a per pupil amount that they fund districts for pupil transportation. And that hasn't been enough to meet the expenses in recent years. Just the last couple of years, it's been, last year we had 37,000 deficit spending, 33,000 the year before that, and the year before that, 47,000. So if we're like averaging, we average more than 35,000, but it depends on our student count. Our student count is projecting to go down the next couple of years. But even if we assumed that the deficit spending the next few years would be like 35,000, this $250,000 that we're requesting would hold us over for 7 years so that we don't have to pay that out of the general fund. Right now, we've been supplementing that fund out of the general fund to meet that need. And that just bites into the contribution that you give us already. And this is the last fiscal year 25, that the borough could do this. The state is changing the regulations because there is a local contribution max. But in the past, it's been allowed that municipalities could make contributions to like food service funds, pupil transportation funds, capital project funds outside of that local contribution max. But then that creates an inequality in different school districts in different areas in the state. So the state's going to crack down on that. Fiscal year 25 will be the last time that that's allowed. So we're hoping to get it bumped up so that we won't have to make up that difference in the next, hopefully 7 years, maybe less, depending on what the deficit looks like year to year. Yeah, and hopefully by then the state fixes their funding.
Yeah, hope so.
Yeah.
Any questions for the school? Going to continue to talk about the school anyway, so don't worry in case you have some more. So in fiscal year 2023, when the school requested to increase their contribution from 2 million to 3 million, that increase was split between the general fund and the Secure Rural Schools funds, using an additional $500,000 each from each fund. In this future budget, the school district is requesting the additional $400,000, and we are budgeting for that all currently in the general fund to cover the entire amount. And of course, we could change that. One of our goals in our budget financial policy is to reduce our reliance on the Secure Rural Schools funds, because it's not a guarantee that we can actually get it again. Do you want to talk about that?
Yeah, I can. So Secure Rural Schools is a leftover from when there used to be a logging industry. And when the Tongass National Forest was kind of locked down, they created this special fund for certain communities that had former, lots of logging going on. And the calculation defies description. I think you have to know calculus to be able to figure it out. But the federal government figures this out every year. And then sends us a nice check. The challenge is it's one of these expenditures by the feds that is not guaranteed to happen year after year after year. So when it gets renewed, it's usually for a couple, 3 years tops. And then we kind of can take a deep breath. There's no guarantee that this will be moved forward, but it's a tough one because we also receive money called payment in lieu of taxes, or PILT. that affects far more states than Secure Rural Schools does. So there's a lot of support for PILT. It's not likely to go away. Secure Rural Schools is a much smaller number of states and municipalities that are interested, that receive the money. So I did talk to our federal lobbyist to say, you know, what does he think? And he says it's the same answer he gives us every year, which is, you know, there's nobody clamoring to make it go away, but it could very easily happen in some of the budget fights that happen in DC. So, you know, that's about as much as I know, which is always it's why we don't want to have to rely on it, because we're never sure when it might go away.
How much of a reserve do we have from what we've saved over the years? And that's,
In the secure rural schools.
Yeah.
Next slide.
oh,
All right, so we
Yeah.
currently have around a little over $3 million. But if we continue to use $1.1 million of it every year to help fund the school, even though we get about $480,000 a year, we're going to run out of reserves in fiscal year 2029, which is in 5 years. And as Steve said, the formula is kind of complicated to determine how much money we're going to get. It just depends on how much overall federal funding there is for the program. Our Forest Service acreage and our per capita income play a factor in that as well.
So the fact that Petersburg folks have a higher per capita income actually hurts us on Secure Rural Schools, of all things.
Probably gonna change.
yeah.
So this is a different look at our reserve fund and the general fund. I was forecasting a 3% increase per year in tax revenue and overhead and a 3% increase in expenses. The general fund will run out of reserves before 2030.
Is that why you made the graph in black?
Yeah.
That way-
And if you see at the very end, after 2029, when the secure rural schools funds run out, that kind of takes a little bit more of a decrease faster. So that really has helped us, keeping that balance up there to draw from, especially now with the higher requests. But I also want to remind you or tell you that besides for operations using that, sometimes we use it for capital projects that they have. So that's been, I think we use it for a match for a project, an elementary school roof project, I believe it was, or siding, yeah. So, and we did create that other school deferred maintenance fund last year or the year before has $1 million in it right now.
So will our portion will the budget change if the state comes through with a higher base student allocation or?
I'm going to defer to the school.
Unfortunately, with our projected student count for next year, even if we get 680 over the BSA, we will still receive less state funding than we received this year.
Well, and were they
and that-
even counting to increase the BSA? I thought they weren't even going to increase the BSA. They were just going to do a one-time
No.
other thing.
Yeah, so 680 one time over. But,
Okay.
I mean,
Okay.
that's, whether it's in the BSA or not, it would be the same funding and it wouldn't even be the same as this year. We don't think 680 is likely at all at this point. 300 or 340 over the BSA would maybe be more likely. And in those scenarios, we're far below the state funding that we received this year. And that's just a drop from 468.6 students to 450. So it really makes a big difference. That student count, it's a big part of the funding formula. And we still have, the same overhead and increased costs. And so we're hoping that you wouldn't reduce that if the state comes through with an increase.
And I think the other part of that to keep in mind is the issue with the one-time versus the BSA. That's the biggest issue that we're trying to get across to legislators as well. And they're doing their best to pass things through. They just don't make much progress when the governor has the pen that he does. So every year, that's what keeps happening with the one-time is you can't count on that. And when it is in the BSA, then at least you know what you can count on. That's the amount that you know it's there. That's what you can budget for. But every year we do this game with the one-time and that's what it's been. So, yeah. Thanks.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Scott.
I got a question for you. haven't really been keeping up on, I've been kind of busy, but that judge's decision it was unconstitutional for correspondence. What's the latest on that? Do you know, is that gonna play into the?
I think there's a stay on it right now. I mean, they're to sort it out here for the next couple of months. It doesn't necessarily directly impact us here in Petersburg, particularly because we don't have a correspondence school here, but we do have families that participate in other correspondence schools around the state. So it may have an impact on some of the special needs funding. That's kind of at the crux of the issue, how families are utilizing those funds. And I don't know how it's all going to play out. Yeah.
Okay, ways to balance the general fund budget. So we've talked about, we could increase property taxes. We kept it flat in this budget, but we could increase it. Increase the amount of secure schools from 1.1 to something higher. Again, that we're gonna run out of that, but it is just for schools and, that's a lot of our increase. Fish tax. So in 2005, I think when I first started, the general fund kept all of the fish tax we received. I'm kind of glad Glo's not here right now to have this conversation, but, and it fluctuates from, sometimes it could be 350,000, sometimes it can be 900,000. This last year, it was 952,000. Well, since 2005, we've kind of ratcheted it down to, general fund keeps the first $350,000 and anything above that goes to the harbor. And that's worked out fairly well for both of us. The general fund knows it's going to get 350,000 and then it does fluctuate a lot. So the harbor doesn't know exactly how much they're going to get, but they're pretty happy with, this last year they received $602,000. So that could be something that we looked at. I don't know if it would be very popular, but it's an option. And I thought I'd try to put all the options on there. Again, we have cutting expenses, personnel, services, use reserves. Again, we have a higher amount of reserves. And I want to talk about modifying sales tax exemptions. This isn't an immediate thing, but we do need to look at ways that we can increase our revenues to, withstand this in the future. And we have a lot of sales tax exemptions, far more than, yes, you, seniors, yes, we have that one. And the lowest sales tax cap in Southeast Alaska that was set in 1959. Anyway, at the second meeting in May, I am going to introduce at least one, maybe three sales tax ordinances to put before the assembly to that they can decide whether they want on the ballot this fall. And one of them will be to increase the sales tax cap. And one of them is not going to go on the ballot. It's just going to change some language in the sales tax ordinance to clarify some things that have been really confusing. A lot of times people call and say, is the Petersburg Borough tax exempt? And we're like, yes, we're tax exempt. It's like we are the ones that collect the tax. And we're a political subdivision of the state. And they're like, well, it's not written in your ordinance. Anyway, we're putting that in our ordinance. We're including the hospital and the school. And that's going in the ordinance as tax exempt, just to spell it all out for people. So it's just been outdated. So that's going to come before you as well.
Jody?
Yeah.
I had a conversation with a person today and they were wondering, can it be done where you raise sales tax for 4 months in the summer, 5 months in the summer, and then lower it?
Yes,
people
so
that
SICA does that.
Suffer the burden of spending the winter here?
SICA
wouldn't
does
call it a
that. They
burden,
have
but-
a hate-love relationship with it, but it places a little bit of a burden on the businesses.
It's hard to
collecting.
administer, isn't it? From a business standpoint,
I think,
if I remember it correctly.
I think so. I think that was the case. There's also, I've learned researching this more, you can put caps on certain items. Like some communities don't have a sales tax cap on anything except a vehicle. If you sold a vehicle, that would be capped. Or you could do it on other things as well. A lot of communities like Juneau, for instance, they have a sales tax cap of 14,300 and something on a single item. but the entire transaction as a whole doesn't have a cap on it if you were to buy other things with the item. So like at the grocery store, I mean, you're never going to have one single item over $14,000 at the grocery store, right? So you could spend, let's say, a cruise ship spends $20,000 on groceries. They're not going to hit a cap because the full sale is not capped. It's just a one item. It's for people that are like buying a boat or a, you know, a one-time thing. And that's something that we could consider as well. It's Wrangell. They just discussed last night at their assembly meeting, raising their $3,000 sales tax cap. Ours is $1,200, by the way. They want to raise their $3,000 sales tax cap to $10,000. I don't know if that's, they're still discussing it. And I don't want to speak for all of them. I don't think all of them probably want to
And
do
that
that, but.
Goes on the ballot, correct? No.
For them, it does not. Petersburg is the only municipality in the state that has to vote on exemption changes. Everyone else has to vote on rate changes, you know, the tax rate, and we do as well. But in 1981, the city council at that time put on the ballot to change the charter that all changes would be voted on, and it passed. And so now it makes it very difficult for, you know, to quickly change anything exemption wise.
The only municipality in the entire state that has.
That, yeah, that I'm aware of. We sent out an email, Debbie did. I had her send it to all the clerks and ask, because it's kind of hard to research and, you know, to go to everyone's code, so.
I've had
Yeah.
conversations with people about fish box tax, like Sitka has.
Yeah, we looked at that a number of years ago. It didn't seem like it would bring in very much revenue, and it might create a lot more work than it would be worth, but we can definitely put any option on the table. Because,
What's the fish tax gonna bring in this year after last summer?
well, we won't know until the state, and they don't disclose the numbers of anything to us. We've asked all the land sales and things, they won't give it to us, so.
Well, I can't
just-
imagine it's gonna be off the charts.
No, it won't. Well, in one year, a couple of years ago, we got less than $350,000, so the harbor didn't get anything, you know, the general fund just kept all the
Right.
fish tax. So that's, you know, that's why maybe using fish tax money isn't such a good way to hedge our bets. Yeah.
I'm curious if we could talk a little bit more about increasing the room tax, and could you remind me exactly how that's calculated? What the basis it's calculated on?
So it's just 4% on a hotel room lodging on their entire bill. It's not on top of the sales tax. It's separate from the sales tax. And it goes into a certain fund, the transient room tax fund, and that fund can only be spent on visitor-related items, which is why I moved the museum to that, because that was a visitor-related item. It has other uses that we could use it for, too, maintaining the streets downtown, the public restrooms, you know, things that the, you know, tourism affects, fixing. Maybe we're talking about the concrete stairs down to the Wrangell Narrows on North Nordic, you know, things. I mean, we could stretch it to do
So it
all
could
types of
offset
things, but it doesn't really bring in a lot of money. That increase from 4% to 7% is projected to only bring in $51,000. We're not talking big money. Yeah.
So what were the total revenues for that like last year? I mean, I assume it's going up a little bit.
Last
but-
year it was $70,000, $71,000.
Is that capped as well, or is that?
No.
It goes for the whole thing? Okay. Some of these lodges out the road, some of those packages are fairly expensive, no? I would have imagined it bringing more money.
Well, and we are going to clarify in this ordinance, the sales tax ordinance, that it's for every 24-hour period. So a hotel room, let's say someone stays for, well, however long, they're never going to hit the cap unless one night is over $1,200. And we need to make sure that the lodges are following that as well. They're not taking the whole a 7-night stay and saying, oh, this much is over 1,200. You know, they are not going to pay sales tax on this amount. No, they should be looking at every night.
Of course they are.
Mhm.
There's no question that they are. If it's a week stay,
Well,
you know,
I think
it's
the,
one check.
yeah.
Not.
well,
the
I
intention,
know,
But yeah.
I know this.
Oh.
Yeah. It just makes sense from a business standpoint.
Are we fairly confident that the Airbnbs in town are on board with or are paying the room tax? I mean, we don't really have any way to,
So every
we don't know how
summer,
many there are.
or once or twice a year, I have someone on my staff just go on to Airbnb, you know, and, you know, make sure, double check that everyone is filing, you know, in our sales tax system. Yeah. And there's more and more of them.
Some of them are, yeah, I mean, they're pretty expensive. Trying to find a place here during Mayfest, you know, staying for a week in a whole house can be, you know, yeah, a lot of money.
Our business caters to the middle. We don't cater to the multimillionaires or billionaires. And if they can write one check and save tax, they'll do it. That's just the way it goes.
Yeah, yeah. So your charters and things, you're supposed to invoice monthly.
No, I
But
know.
as far as hotels and lodges and things, how they calculate sales tax could be treated a little bit differently than maybe they're doing it now. So we need to reach out to them and make sure that that's how they're doing it. Anyway, any more questions?
Change the sales tax like a graduated scale for certain services and rather than goods, like we don't, I wouldn't favor a sales tax increase on like groceries. But I would on services, you know, like a charter service.
I think you can do something like that. But I'm not for sure. I'll get back to you on that. I'll ask our attorney on that one. Yeah. Okay, so after I sent you guys the budget, we heard from our healthcare provider or health insurance broker that actually what we had budgeted a 12% increase in health insurance, but it's going to be 8%. And so this is going to decrease the total borough budget by $60,000, which is $26,000 in the general fund. So we're almost exactly $400,000 upside down now in the general fund instead of 426,000. But you can see in just looking really quick at the different departments, the ones that are really employee heavy, you know, see the biggest difference, you know, the police department, the assisted living, they have a lot of employees and that have health insurance. And so it makes a big difference. I mean, we spend $1.8 million on health insurance a year.
Big number.
A big number. Okay, we have one new capital project in the budget this year, and it's found on page 86. It's the Scow Bay vessel haul out. We found out that we would be awarded $4.1 million. We're not sure how much, or do we know how much, Liz, the state's going to take of that 4.1?
Not exactly, probably somewhere around just north of 6% for the indirect.
And do you think that this project will do much this next year? As far as, or are we just looking for more funding?
We're looking for more funding, but the state still needs to include this in the state transportation improvement plan and get that approved by the federal government. And they just got the last one approved, so it'll be a few months at least before they even do that. And then they have to assign a project lead and start the NEPA process. So just those two things alone are several months worth of time waiting on the state to do those two items. So in the meantime, we'll just be applying for other grants.
Pretty exciting, though. It's been a long time coming. Does anyone have any questions about that? Okay, our general obligation bond debt. We currently have 2.5 million of outstanding general obligation bond debt. We just paid off Mountain View Manor's bond this last year, so that was pretty exciting. And the school deferred maintenance bond will be paid off in September. So that's, yeah, that's exciting too. Currently, all of these bonds are the responsibility of Service Area 1. And the question I get asked all the time is, how much can we bond? And so I added that to the top part of the slide. We could bond approximately $39 million more than we have now. Would we want to do that? No, but that would be, but we could. So speaking of bonds, we are probably going to have on the ballot a bond proposition for the school, for a middle school and high school roof replacement, and we also the security and access project. We are number 12 on the DCIP list for the roof project. Steve, you want to talk about where we are at on that?
Yeah, and Erica, please jump in if I say anything that you know more updated information, but the school has a deferred maintenance list with deed. The legislature at this point, both parts, the House and the Senate have funded down to number 15. We're number 12 on the list. So at this point, we're in line to get a big check from the state towards this project. We don't know what the governor's going to do. And that's the elephant in the room, is if he decides to veto it and it goes from 15 funded projects to 5 or 3 or something like that. The legislature will be annoyed if that happens, but there's not much they can do about it. Yeah.
Okay, we're going to skip to the enterprise fund budgets now. We have 7 enterprise funds and an internal service fund, the motor pool. After adding back in depreciation and capital outlays, things look okay, but of course we have a lot of capital outlays and things are depreciating. So the enterprise funds are looking at rate studies. Currently, we have utility rate increases on July 1st for water, wastewater, and sanitation of 3%. Elderly housing rates are set by HUD annually. And then assisted living Medicaid rates are set by Medicaid annually. So some of the projects for the electric fund, these were all in last year's budget, or this current year, I should say, budget as well. The Blind Sioux Hydro system will almost be done. It is pretty much done, right, Carl? There's just a little bit left.
Yeah, it's virtually done. And actually the biggest item is just trying to work through this DOE grant and get that settled so we can close everything out.
Okay. And then would you say that your next biggest project for electric would be the standby diesel generator?
Absolutely.
Okay. Does anyone have any questions about any of those capital projects for Carl? Okay. Water and wastewater projects. We have the Fram Street water main replacement, Singley Alley main replacement, Lake Street water treatment plant, Clearwell. Carl, would you say the pump station for force main replacement is going to be the big project of the year?
It will definitely be the big project of the year. Yeah.
And okay, and is the tree cutting up by the school, is that for the pump station 3 rehab? Is that why you guys were cutting trees up there? I was just wondering.
No, that was just some maintenance on the side of the road.
Oh, that
I
was just
believe.
maintenance?
Yeah.
Oh. Okay, where is the pump station right there?
Pump station 3?
Yeah,
It is actually tucked in between the old forklift maintenance shed and the hillside. It's right at the bottom of the hill, back in the corner back there.
oh, okay. Does anyone have any questions about these projects?
I've got, so up the water line replacement projects, those are gonna be projects that will go out to bid? Or we're not gonna try to do any of those in-house, even the Singley Alley water line, or didn't I?
Probably they'll go out to bid, yeah. I think that's the current plan.
And these aren't in the budget, but these are future water, wastewater, power and light projects that are going to need to be done. And so this is a good time to mention that there's going to be another ballot proposition for more ADEC loans. We have voter approval currently on the books, but it expires soon. Our attorney set it up so it expires every 5 years. And so it's time again. The ADEC loans for water and wastewater are great. They are only 1.5% interest. You can't beat that at all. And do you have anything you want to add to that? Or is there any questions? No? Okay. Wanted to let you know what was coming. Sanitation, professional services is up due to a budget of $25,000 cost for a rate study. Oh, and that's another thing with the water and wastewater. DEC actually will pay for water and wastewater's rate studies, whereas they won't pay for sanitation's rate study. Sorry, Chris. Machine and equipment is up $38,000 primarily for garbage cans and $100,000 for a fire sprinkler system replacement. Chris, do we system in the Baylor?
Yes, we do. We have verified that with the state fire marshal. We looked into eliminating that system just because it's not primarily an occupied building, but because there is some level of occupancy, offices and so forth, we have to maintain that fire suppression system.
Harbor, these are some of the major harbor projects Globe put in the budget. The drive down approach and the sea float stall replacement. Usability Skyway for 400,000 being the biggest ones. They are also gonna replace the harbor skiff. Not the harbor safety boat, the little skiff, yeah.
Can we step
Yep.
back to
Yes.
page 23, the wastewater? Carl, what's the status of our permit for where we dump water into Frederick South?
That's a great question. It's moving forward. The draft permit should be coming to us in June. We'll get a good look at that. It's going to add costs for certain to the department's operations. We don't know how much yet. But it, from what we've heard from EPA, it will definitely include the need for disinfecting our discharge and within 5 years of the issuance of the permit. So that in itself is going to be a large project, but in the interim, there's going to be a lot more testing and sampling required that will add to the operational costs.
So we still may meet federal standards, but not new standards the state is trying to implement, or am I misunderstanding?
The big issue at first was whether or not we would be able to maintain our 301H waiver, our treatment waiver. And that question has been answered. We do still qualify for that, and the federal government is okay with, extending that. The problem that we face now is that the state's water quality standards are forcing us to tighten the parameters of our discharge. And that will have an impact on operational costs and capital costs in a big way.
Utilities costs,
What's that?
eventually utilities costs for people probably. Yeah,
It all comes back. Every enterprise fund has to pay for what their operations through rates. And so any of those large expenses that hit the enterprise funds get passed on to the
well,
customers.
that's the pickle I think we're in. I get it takes me an hour to get out of the hardware store. It's costs are going up for the school, costs are going up for everybody. I watched an elderly woman leave TU with a ham that was on sale and a bag of rice. And I knew that was her food for the week. And her utilities have gone up almost double in 5 years. We had a letter of 62% increase in sale and property tax in 3 years. So I don't see us taxing our way into prosperity. We're in a pickle here. This is rough. And you know. Get any money for the counseling I'm given, but it's tough on some people here. I just had to say it, so we'll move on.
Mountain View Manor capital outlay, the elderly housing is budgeting $30,000 for walk-in coolers, window replacements, main entrance repair. We've kind of went over the main entrance repair. It's been in the supplemental budget, but the walk-in coolers, are you guys familiar with that? Michelle, do you want to talk about what's going on with those?
About 8 years ago, the coolers were all replaced, brand new, walk-in cooler, walk-in freezer. And when the work was done, the flooring that was put under the coolers wasn't adequate for the function of the coolers, meaning they were supposed to go on like a cement type floor. So they've sweated over all this time. And when they went to go do something, or somebody noticed it was getting spongy from the linoleum into the ramp going up into the cooler. And they went underneath, and the hole underneath all the insulation, like 18 inches of insulation, was completely soaked in black, and the floor just needs to be replaced, and possibly like a different situation put in there where they laid down a concrete subfloor. So that's gonna require more beefing up of everything underneath that area. But everything has to be completely disassembled and taken out in order to get to that.
So it's not so much the coolers themselves, it's what they're sitting on.
Yes. The coolers are still doing fine, yeah.
And the elderly housing has a healthy fund balance that they'll be able to pay for this directly just from their fund.
See, us older folks, we contribute, we pay, got a balance in it, the people are paying their money.
The assisted living fund, we've budgeted $30,000 for parking lot improvements. This is actually going to be paid with if approved, gonna be paid with an ARPA grant. It'll just finish off the last of one of these grants that we have. And that's just to make, Derek, is it just to make additional parking, correct? Just if you've ever been to the assisted living facility, there's like 5 spots, and if those are full, people are parking like in the emergency lanes and stuff, right?
Yeah, they're working, when we have birthday parties or extra people coming up just to see family members, they start parking along the side of the buildings. And then they also park on the other side, and then when they run out of that, they're actually going into the fire lane to park.
Any questions? Okay, motor pool. 3 replacement vehicles are being recommended for purchase. The Public Works pickup was originally scheduled for replacement in 2015 and has been extended many times. The Power and Light Material Handler was originally scheduled for replacement in 2020 and extended twice. The Power and Light Digger Derrick, this unit is used to haul and place power poles, transformers, excuse me, and general crane work. It was also slated for replacement in fiscal year 2020 and was extended for another 5 years. And there is a memo that went out with your budget on the 15th that from Chris that explains in greater detail about these 3 vehicles. Any questions now for him?
Just a simple question, that material handler bucket truck, that's the long, when they get up and work on the power lines and stuff up the top of the poles?
That's the 55-foot bucket.
Yeah, okay.
Okay, so the first reading of the budget will be at the May 6th meeting. And if the assembly wants to schedule any other work sessions to go into more in the depth in this, we can also definitely talk about it during those meetings. Yeah, of course. And that's when you'll be able to make changes if you wish. That's also the time that I told community services if they wanted to talk about their requests. I reached out to all of them, including the two that weren't funded in this budget, and just let them know that that would be a good meeting for them to be at. And that's it. Any questions?
So generating revenue. Sounds like some of that's gonna have to go to the voters in
Yes.
October.
Yes, the transient room tax and sales tax.
Yeah,
Caps or rates or, like, Scott asked about different tax rates at different times of the year. Anything directly related to the rates or exemptions has to go to the voters.
Well, change to the millage.
Yeah, the bonding will have to go there too, so.
Bonding as well, yeah.
well, we talked to the assessor last meeting. And I've heard an awful lot of complaints about people's property tax going up based on their assessments. Even if it goes to the voters, I don't see it passing. But maybe it will. I mean,
Well, the one thing with the sales tax cap, I mean, it's not going to affect your everyday purchases. The people that can least afford to pay sales tax will not be affected because they probably won't be buying anything, most usually over $1,200.
I could see the sales tax passing maybe. I mean, for our tour business, we just pass it on to the tourists. Right?
Exactly. I
I
mean,
mean,
no
it'd be a
one-
difference, what you and I talked about is difference $6,000 to 18,000.
well, and
For the town, but as far as the mill rate for property tax,
The mill rate doesn't have to go before the voters, though. That's an assembly decision.
no, the
correct?
assembly will decide.
Yeah.
Yeah.
At one of the next assembly meetings, I'll bring a resolution with a mill rate in it. I need to get a feel for what you're gonna do with the budget first, though, and what that property tax revenue number is gonna be. If you're gonna increase it, that'll change what the mill rate will be. So right now, if we left it the same, the mill rate's actually gonna drop because assessed value went up. So there's a lot in play, in motion, so.
Yeah, and one of the things I think, and I get it, people don't live this like we do. Assessed values go up, that has nothing to do with your rate.
okay,
It's the two in combination that ends up what you pay. So the rate times the value ends up what the mill rate, what you're paying, what you have to write the check for. So just because the values go up doesn't mean that your taxes are gonna go up, although it often will. That depends on what the assembly wants to do with the rate itself.
yeah, people just know their taxes. are
Right,
up.
exactly. I mean, but it is I think everyone in this room has seen it, what housing prices have happened in Petersburg, and the assessments are gonna go up. And it's, you look at what housing prices, what building supplies, inflation has driven all of that, rental prices for people. It doesn't surprise me that assessments went up. Because they're supposed to be based on, how's it? True and accurate, sales, true and full value. Thank you. And so, honestly, we look, in fact, the assembly just dealt with this, Island Refrigeration. You got an assessment for 200,000, the appraisal was 416.
Right,
So, I mean, I would guess if we appraised every house or property in the borough, you'd find assessments going up even more. Meaning
Yeah.
that, so
Yes.
assessments are in a sense artificially lower than their real value. But it's that way everywhere in Alaska. It's just kind of the process. But that's what Jody's talking about, is the assembly's gonna have to weigh in on how do you want to do this? I mean, as she said, taxes are actually going down, especially with all the bonds that have been paid off recently. So
Mill rates.
the mill rate's gonna go down, or could go down. So I'm making the same mistake. But yeah, that's the tough side of it. As we've paid off all these bonds, that comes off people's tax bill, so they're not paying that anymore. So does a increase in the mill rate, is that easier for people to handle? Because again, the bonds have been paid off. Any future bonds has to be paid by both service area one and outside service area. So anyway, it's a tough conversation.
And you're welcome anytime to come and ask me questions, or Steve, or department heads. I'm around, so. Anytime, yeah. That,
I had a comment.
yeah.
Earlier it was asked about like if the state came through with more funding, would the borough then lessen their contribution? And I mentioned, you know, even if we got 680 over the BSA, not in the BSA, we still wouldn't receive the same state funding as last year. But just looking at our first draft of the budget that we've already talked about with our school board, we're using $300,000 of our fund balance, assuming that we're getting the 3.4 from the borough and a flat BSA. So if we do get the 300 or the 340 over the BSA, that's just making up that fund balance so that we're not deficit spending.
Yeah.
Right now, we're planning on deficit spending.
Similar to our
Same.
proposed budget.
And the state right now too,
Yeah, I mean,
actually.
that's one of the options, as Jody pointed out, was we have reserves in the general fund that are significant. But as she pointed out, though, they only last so long. So I mean, the assembly could vote to balance the budget using our reserves. Nothing wrong with that. I mean, that's turning money back that means we avoid property increases and so on. But you know, as Jody also pointed out, we've got to start thinking ahead if we want to touch exemptions and change sales tax stuff, because it takes a while. You got to go to the voters. You got to talk about it, and it may not happen right away.
Doing that, we're kicking the can down the road.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And whereas if we start to implement, you know, small changes now or small to medium changes now, then it won't be so big later on.
Oh,
And that's how we have to think. I think.
Well, and that sales tax cap, again, it was set $1,000, it was set in 1959. That is over $10,000 today in today's dollars. If we didn't have a sales tax cap, which most places down south don't, we would have, that would be another $28 million, which in taxes is $1.6 million we would have every year.
No,
And, you know, when tourists come and they buy a charter, you know, visit or a cruise, they're looking at the price. They're not thinking, what's the sales tax? They're not assuming it's going to be capped at something. It's not going to, you know, when you go and book a hotel room, you're not really usually looking at the taxes until you get the bill after your stay. And you're like, oh,
everywhere you go,
Wow.
it's added on.
Skip the
Anchorage
extra
charges a
blanket and the
lot.
pillow, right?
right.
I wonder if we should do like a marketing campaign before it, and,
Yeah.
you know, just to explain it, like,
Oh,
this
yeah.
is one of the steps that we need to implement so that we don't have to do bigger things that directly affect you, like your property tax.
Yes, and I'm glad you mentioned that, because I did go to one of the Chamber of Commerce's meetings and I talked to them about this. I talked to them about the transit room tax, which they were in support of. And I talked to them about the sales tax cap. None of the businesses at the chamber like the sales tax cap. They would love to have it higher. And so I have asked them to write a letter of recommendation. I don't know when I'm gonna get that. They're meeting the first week of May. So I'm hoping I'll get it before the second assembly meeting in May.
it's a problem. I mean, not a problem. It's a administrative nightmare for a lot of different folks, including Jody, trying to figure out what are we, you know, what's the value if it goes away? I mean, and what level should it be set at? Generally, down south, you don't have sales tax caps. You pay sales tax on whatever the purchases are. This is, you know, a Southeast Alaska or Alaska thing, and we just haven't adjusted it for
Right.
quite a long time.
And I can give you the value if we have no cap, but if we just decide to raise it to, let's say, 5,000, which is $300 of sales tax. I'm not going to be able to tell you how much exactly that's going to generate, because when businesses file their sales tax, they don't give me the number of sales above 1,200 and how much those are. So it's a little bit of a guessing game.
Hard to quantify.
Mm-hmm.
More questions for my group? Jody?
Exactly an hour. Look
Hey,
at
Jody.
that.
Jody,
Perfect, Jody. Good job.
have you looked into at all what's a increase to services that go outside of Service Area 1 would do? If, say, you were charging for like police and fire, who do periodically go out there, provide services where they're not supposed to?
I haven't.
So when the borough was formed, one of the things that happened was they just were kind of operating a gray area where we still get called to go outside Service Area 1. And there's no one else to go out there. So one of the things that might help the general, yeah, it's changing some of the things in borough charter that say fire service is technically only supposed to operate within Service Area 1. And same with police. And to tax that borough-wide instead of just within Service Area 1.
But is there a fee associated with
Only for
fire
the-
trucks responding to a fire or ambulance responding to help somebody outside of?
Only for the ambulance, and that goes to, it goes back to the general fund, but we get it back in the form of stocking supplies and things like that. I think it's 60 or 70,000 back. Something like that.
So if the ambulance goes to Papke's to pick somebody up,
But fire trucks go out there, no reimbursement. So it's, we pay the fuel costs, whatever it costs to get equipment and stuff out there. We go on a search and rescue mission out to Kupernoff, go pick someone off a mountain. Service Area 1 is footing that bill. So,
Farragut Bay,
Farragut Bay,
Coast Guard helicopter
Agassiz,
crashes.
any of that. So that's something that you guys might start looking at too. So for the service, because we get called, people want us to go out there. I mean, they want to call us, they didn't want us to go out there. So that's something you might also start trying to entertain too.
Okay, well,
Place the Coast Guard doesn't charge for search and rescue.
so
Number one, water related.
if there's no other questions or discussion, thanks for putting this together, Jody.
Thank
Um,
you for coming,
and,
everybody.
Just to remind the administration, I will try to call in on the 6th, the first reading of the budget, but we'll see, or Zoom in, but where I'm living down there is not very good Wi-Fi. I guess I can go to the library.